Hello, my name's Lucinda. It started when I missed my nephew's birthday, and my sister called me a bad aunt just like that. But the truth was heavier, buried under years of silent expectations, of being the family's free babysitter, the fixer, the forgotten one. And when her husband found out everything we were never supposed to talk about, well, that's when everything shattered. The group chat was already buzzing when I unlocked my phone that morning. I hadn't even had my first coffee yet, and my screen was flashing nonstop with messages from my mom, Doris, and my older sister, Pamela. It was early June, and like clockwork, the family had started planning our annual summer gathering. A trip that, no matter how many times I hoped otherwise, always seemed to end with me babysitting Pamela's 3 kids, while everyone else enjoyed their well-deserved break. I scrolled through the thread, my stomach tightening with every new message. Pamela had dropped a bomb right out of the gate. "Lucinda, you're coming to the boys' birthday party, right? I mean, it's not like you have a family of your own to celebrate with." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. The jab was sharp, but casual enough that she could pretend it was a joke if I called her out. Mom chimed in immediately afterward, bypassing any actual conversation. "Also, I booked the rooms. Pamela and Josh will have the king suite, and you'll share with the boys again, Lucinda. They love you." There it was. No question, no check-in, just a command masked as a loving assumption. I wasn't even consulted about my sleeping arrangements, let alone asked if I wanted to spend my so-called vacation crammed in a room with 3 hyperactive 8-year-olds. A knot formed in my chest, hot and suffocating. Before I could even begin crafting a response, Pamela's next message popped up. "It's honestly sad you're not more involved with your nephews. They adore you. Family doesn't just happen, Lucinda. You have to show up." That passive-aggressive scolding wrapped itself around me like barbed wire. I could almost hear her smug tone through the pixels. The familiar silence crept up on me, the one I had perfected over years of playing the good daughter, the good sister, the good aunt. I had always swallowed my anger to keep the peace, convinced myself that it wasn't worth starting a fight over a sleeping arrangement or an unfair assumption. But lately, that silence had started to taste bitter, like something rotting at the back of my throat. The worst part wasn't even Pamela's entitled attitude. It was how easily Doris went along with it, how my own mother never once asked if I was okay with these expectations. It was just assumed. Lucinda was free, single, childless. Lucinda had no real responsibilities. Lucinda could always step in where needed. My fingers hovered over the keyboard again. I typed, "I'm not comfortable sharing a room with the boys. I would like my own space this year." I stared at the words, heart hammering. Then I deleted them. I could already picture the explosion, the guilt trips, the quiet accusations of selfishness. I locked the phone and set it face down on the table, the room spinning slightly around me. Why was it always me expected to sacrifice? Why was my time, my energy, my peace somehow worth less because I didn't have a husband or kids of my own? Later that afternoon, I drove to Mom's house for a quick, pre-trip planning session Pamela had insisted on. The living room smelled like lemon-scented cleaner and stale coffee. Doris greeted me with a distracted kiss on the cheek, while balancing her iPad and a notepad filled with scribbled to-do lists. Pamela was already there, perched on the edge of the couch like a queen surveying her subjects. Her 3 boys were sprawled out on the floor, playing some loud video game, their laughter filling every corner of the room. The second I stepped inside, Pamela launched into it. "Lucinda, we were just talking about the sleeping situation. The boys are so excited to bunk with you again. It's going to be like a big slumber party." Her smile was all teeth and no warmth. I forced a polite nod, feeling the familiar tightening around my chest. "Actually, I was hoping to get my own room this time," I said, keeping my voice steady. Pamela blinked, her mouth falling open for a fraction of a second before she caught herself. She turned to Mom like I wasn't even standing there. "Can you believe this? She doesn't even want to be with family anymore. What's she gonna do, sit alone and sulk the whole trip?" Doris gave me a strained look, like I had just announced I was defecting to another family. "Lucinda, sweetie, don't make this harder than it needs to be. It's just easier if you're with the boys. You're so good with them." Easier. For who? Certainly not for me. I swallowed the rising heat in my throat, the sharp retorts that clawed their way up. They didn't want a family vacation. They wanted a built-in nanny who didn't ask for compensation or consideration. I didn't say a word. I sat through the rest of the meeting, nodding at the right times, pretending to be involved while my mind raced elsewhere. They talked about dinners, outings, spa appointments, every detail planned around Pamela and Josh's comfort, with my own needs treated as an afterthought, if they were acknowledged at all. By the time I got home, night had fallen. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. I sat in the dark, staring at my phone as the group chat continued to explode with logistics, none of which included my input. I opened the chat window. I typed, "I won't be sharing a room with the kids this year." I hovered over the send button, my thumb trembling slightly. Then with a sigh I deleted it. Not yet. But this summer would not end with me cleaning up someone else's mess again. The house stayed still around me, the walls soaking up the late-night silence like sponges. My phone lay face down on the couch, but even without looking at it, I could feel the heavy pulse of messages waiting. I pushed myself off the cushion with a sigh, flipped the phone over, and braced for impact. There it was, another barrage of texts from Doris. This time, not in the group chat. This time it was private. "Sweetheart, please don't let the family down. Just this one last time, Lucinda. They need you." I sat there for a long moment, reading those words again and again, as if they might somehow soften if I blinked enough. They didn't. I could almost hear her voice, syrupy sweet and trembling with practiced sadness, the same voice she'd used when I was a kid and didn't want to stay up babysitting while the adults went to the casino. Guilt, dressed up like love. A trick so old, it should have lost its power by now, and yet it still curled itself around my ribs, squeezing until my lungs felt too tight for air. I set the phone down without replying, pushing it farther across the table, as if distance could dilute the effect. But it was already burrowed under my skin. The next morning, Boulder woke to a soft drizzle misting the streets. I sipped my coffee by the window, watching the gray clouds crawl low across the sky. My mind, however, wasn't on the weather. It was busy replaying a lifetime's worth of moments where saying yes had cost me pieces of myself. I remembered being 8 years old, clutching a book I'd been desperate to finish, only to be pulled away to watch Pamela's friends' little brothers while they giggled upstairs. No one asked. No one cared that I'd had plans of my own. I remembered 16, being the only one who cleaned up after family cookouts, while Pamela basked in everyone's praise. I remembered college weekends sacrificed to babysit so Pamela could reconnect with Josh, while I sat on a sagging couch, pretending not to mind missing my best friend's birthday party. Help wasn't something I offered freely. Help was something extracted from me, expected without thanks or acknowledgement. And now, years later, here it was again. Different words, same cage. By late afternoon, the group chat was alive again. The messages weren't as overt this time, but they carried their own kind of bite. Family always comes first. Some of us don't have the luxury to just think about ourselves. Being single doesn't mean being selfish, Lucinda. Each message was like a pebble thrown at a glass window, small alone, but relentless when combined. I didn't need names attached to the text to know who they were aimed at. Pamela, of course, was leading the charge, her tone sharpened by the false righteousness of someone convinced of their own martyrdom. Josh chimed in with vague support for keeping the family tradition alive, a man too busy to pick up a phone unless it involved optics. Even my cousin Nadine, who usually stayed out of the drama, dropped a passive-aggressive comment about how some people just didn't understand what it meant to sacrifice for family. The part that burned the most wasn't their words. It was how unsurprising they were. I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly, letting the bitterness settle. If there was one lesson life had taught me over and over, it was that guilt was the currency my family used to keep me in line, and I had been their most profitable investment. That evening, I packed my suitcase with mechanical precision, folding clothes I wasn't sure I'd even wear. My fingers brushed over a sundress I had bought weeks ago, back when I'd foolishly believed this trip could be different. That maybe, just maybe, this would be the year they saw me as more than a resource to be tapped when convenient. The suitcase sat by the door, zipped and ready. I wasn't. Lying in bed later, the darkness pressed against me from all sides. My phone glowed on the nightstand, the latest messages a silent accusation. I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I started typing, stopped, deleted, started again. I'm not available to babysit this year. Delete. I'm attending as a guest, not as free labor. Delete. My fingers trembled, the screen blurring as I blinked back frustrated tears. Why was it so hard to say no to people who never hesitated to say yes, to their own needs at my expense? Maybe because somewhere deep down, I still wanted their approval, their acceptance, their recognition that I was part of the family, not just the infrastructure keeping it afloat. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles overhead, a colder realization slid into place. They were never going to see me differently. Not unless I made them. My fingers tightened around the phone, not with anger this time, but with a quiet, measured resolve. Maybe silence had been my mistake all along. 2 days later, the feeling hadn't faded. If anything, it had sharpened into something harder, more focused. It gnawed at me while I watered my plants on the back porch, while I filed designs at the studio, even while I tossed and turned at night, staring at the crack of moonlight spilling across my bedroom ceiling. I wasn't restless because I had doubts. I was restless because, for once, I had a choice, and it was terrifying. Saturday evening found me curled up on the worn leather couch in my living room, laptop balanced on my knees. The TV was on but muted, flickering light across the walls like ghostly dancers. I opened a blank document. For a moment, my hands hovered over the keyboard, uncertain. Then, without really planning it, the words started to pour out. I didn't name names. I didn't call anyone out directly. But I laid everything bare. The endless summers spent babysitting while Pamela went to day spas. The Christmas mornings where I cleaned up after everyone else's kids while my own coffee went cold. The guilt trips disguised as family love. Every small indignity, every overlooked moment, strung together into a truth I could no longer swallow. The words came in fits and starts, raw and messy at first, but then steadier, clearer. I didn't dress them up to make myself look better or them look worse. I just wrote it the way it had felt, heavy, suffocating, and inescapable. I paused once to wipe my palms on my jeans. My heart hammered like I was about to jump off a ledge. I reread what I had typed. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I saved the file, logged into Medium, and created a brand new anonymous account. Username, Second Daughter Speaks. The cursor hovered over the Publish button. For a second, my thumb itched to retreat. Maybe this was too much. Maybe they'd find it anyway. Maybe they'd know it was me. But the maybe that mattered more was this. Maybe it was time someone in this family finally told the truth. I clicked Publish. The post went live. I leaned back, breathless, half exhilarated, half terrified. The relief was immediate, like exhaling after holding my breath underwater for too long. At the same time, a sick twist of anxiety coiled low in my gut. I closed the laptop carefully, as if the whole thing might shatter if I moved too fast. The next morning I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating violently across my nightstand. I groaned, reaching blindly for it. 10 missed messages, 5 missed calls. And then the group chat, a flashing red badge practically screaming at me. I thumbed it open, still half asleep. The first message hit like a slap. Is this your idea of loyalty? Then another. How could you air our dirty laundry to the world? Disgusting! Pamela's rant was a wall of text too long to read in one breath, filled with accusations about betrayal, selfishness, and destroying the family's image. Doris's private text came next, soft where Pamela's had been sharp, but somehow cutting deeper. Honey, I thought you loved us. How could you humiliate your own family like this? I dropped the phone onto the bedspread, heart thudding. So, they had found it. Of course they had. Maybe I had even wanted them to. By noon, the texts became calls. The calls became voicemails. And the voicemails became threats wrapped in tearful pleading. You're tearing the family apart, Pamela shrieked in one voicemail, her voice cracked and furious. You think you're the victim here? Newsflash, Lucinda. You're the selfish one. You've always been the selfish one. Another voicemail came from Doris, her voice breaking in a way that made my stomach knot. Sweetheart, we're family. Family forgives each other. Family doesn't broadcast private matters to strangers. Take the post down, please, before it's too late. But something inside me had shifted. Something that refused to unhear all the times they'd conveniently forgotten my sacrifices, the way they'd weaponized my love for them against me. By nightfall, I sat alone in the living room, the laptop closed, my phone buzzing nonstop beside me. I didn't pick it up. I didn't answer the door when someone knocked. I didn't even turn on the TV. I just sat there in the dim glow of the single lamp, feeling the weight of the storm I had unleashed, and refusing for once to apologize for it. I whispered it out loud, tasting the words like a vow. For once I chose myself. Let's see what happens next. The morning after my quiet vow, the world outside my window looked the same. Calm, bright, deceptively normal. But inside my phone, a war had begun. I knew before even unlocking the screen, that gut feeling that only comes when something familiar turns hostile. 3 days had passed since I published the post on Medium. 3 days of silence broken only by a few furious voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. I thought maybe, just maybe, the worst had passed. I thought wrong. It started innocently enough. A ding from the family group chat while I was sipping coffee in my kitchen. Then another. And another. Curiosity won over caution, and I opened it. Pamela's message lit up the thread like gasoline on dry grass. Some people think it's okay to betray their own blood. Some people forget everything we ever did for them. Some people would rather play the victim online than be a real part of this family. The words weren't subtle. They weren't meant to be. She didn't use my name, but the accusation screamed louder than anything direct ever could. Cousin Nadine chimed in next, uncertain but eager to belong. It's sad when people think attention is more important than family. Even Doris, the woman who had once rocked me to sleep with lullabies, didn't defend me. Instead, she posted something worse, something colder. It's easy to forget your roots when you think you're better than the people who raised you. A fist clenched deep inside my chest, harder than anything their words alone could cause. They weren't just angry. They were rewriting the story, painting me as ungrateful, spoiled, disloyal. Pamela kept fueling the fire. Real family doesn't air dirty laundry to strangers. Real family works things out like adults. Guess some people never grew up. I put the phone down, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes until the world behind my lids swam with stars. It wasn't about the post anymore. It was about punishing me for daring to speak, daring to step outside the neat, obedient role they had assigned me. Later that afternoon, the betrayal deepened. While reorganizing files in my home office, I overheard a phone conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd cracked the window for some fresh air and, by pure chance, caught Nadine's voice floating up from the sidewalk below. She was pacing back and forth, phone pressed to her ear, tension thick in every step. Look, Pam, I don't know if she'll go for it. Lucinda's not the same anymore. No, I'm telling you, she's different. A pause. Nadine sighed, clearly uncomfortable. I'll try, okay? I'll tell her the kids miss her. Maybe that'll soften her up. But I'm not making promises. Pamela's voice was faint but furious through the speaker. Make her feel guilty if you have to. Just get it done. We can't have another trip like last year. She needs to get over herself. I stood frozen at the window, the Colorado breeze brushing against my face like a slap. So this was the plan. If public shaming didn't work, private manipulation would. Use someone I trusted to wedge open a door I had just fought to close. I let the curtain fall back into place and turned away, feeling something inside me finally settle. Not the way a wound heals, but the way a scab hardens to protect raw flesh. They hadn't changed. They never intended to. The betrayal wasn't just Pamela's anymore. It was Nadine's too. Doris's too. Maybe it had always been. For the rest of the evening, I moved through the house on autopilot, folding laundry, watering plants, setting out paperwork for tomorrow's client meeting. But underneath it all, a plan was taking shape. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't even going to explain myself anymore. I sat at the dining table as dust spilled across the hardwood floors, phone resting heavy beside me, unanswered messages stacking up like a wall between who I had been and who I was becoming. This wasn't about winning their approval anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity. I stared at the darkening horizon outside my window, feeling the first calm resolve I'd had in weeks. If they wanted a battle, I wasn't planning to lose this time. The next morning, I didn't wait for another passive-aggressive text to roll in. I didn't wait for another manufactured emergency to be hurled at me under the guise of family unity. I brewed my coffee with slow, deliberate motions, sat at the dining table with my phone in hand, and dialed. If they were going to hear from me, they were going to hear the real me this time, not the obedient echo of their expectations. Doris picked up after the second ring. Her voice was soft, syrupy, like she already knew she needed to sound sweet to get her way. "Lucinda, sweetheart, I'm so glad you called. We were just talking about how nice it'll be to have everyone together next week." I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended, but without apology. "I'm not babysitting this year, Mom. I'm not staying in a room with the kids. I'm not sacrificing my vacation again." There was a pause, thick enough to taste. "You don't mean that," Doris said finally, her tone dipping into that familiar, wounded place that used to gut me like a fish. "You're just upset. You'll see it differently once we're all together." "No," I said, firm now, anchoring myself against the tide of guilt. "I'm serious. I'm not the family's backup plan anymore. You'll need to figure out childcare without me." Before she could respond, I added, "And Pamela needs to stop trying to manipulate Nadine into guilt-tripping me. It's over." Silence, brittle and stunned. Then a sharp intake of breath, the sound of someone realizing they've lost the control they thought was eternal. "We never wanted to make you feel—" Doris started, but I wasn't here for damage control. "You did. For years," I said quietly. "Maybe you didn't mean to, but you did, and it's stopping now." I hung up before the conversation could mutate into another one of those endless spirals where the villain became the victim. Setting my phone down, I breathed out slowly. My hands shook a little, but it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. The aftershock of standing up when every fiber of me had been trained to sit down and stay silent. While I tidied up the kitchen, the group chat buzzed with a few half-hearted attempts at damage control. Doris sent a vague message about looking forward to the trip. Pamela sent a passive-aggressive emoji, a thumbs-up that somehow radiated hostility. But no one dared mention babysitting again. Later that afternoon, I logged onto Medium out of curiosity more than anything. I hadn't checked the post since the fallout began. To my surprise, there were hundreds of comments now. Stories from strangers who had been the good kid, the reliable one, the one taken for granted until they finally cracked. And buried among the comments was one that froze me mid-scroll. "If you're reading this and it sounds like your sister, you're not crazy. You're just the first one brave enough to say it out loud." The username wasn't anonymous. It was Ronald, Pamela's husband. I clicked on his profile, blinking hard to make sure I wasn't imagining it. He'd left another comment under a different reply thread. "Family doesn't mean using someone until they break. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for the people you love is refuse to be their crutch anymore." A shiver raced down my spine. Not fear this time, but something dangerously close to hope. Ronald saw it. He saw what I had been screaming into the void for years. And if he saw it, maybe others would too. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Change never came cleanly in our family. It came through friction, resistance, and often open warfare. But still, maybe this time I wasn't alone. The next few days passed in a strange, tense silence. The family group chat went from frantic to eerily still. No more guilt bombs, no more last-minute demands. Just a few stilted logistics about who was bringing which dish to the beach barbecue. I noticed the shift, subtle but unmistakable. Without my participation, the machine of obligation they'd built around me sputtered. They didn't know how to function without a designated fixer. Doris messaged me privately once. "We're all looking forward to seeing you. I hope you'll reconsider helping out, but if not, we'll make it work." It wasn't an apology, It wasn't even an acknowledgement, but it was a crack in the wall. The first sign that they were starting to understand that my no wasn't a phase or a tantrum or a ploy for attention. It was a boundary, a real one. Saturday night, after a day spent prepping for a client meeting, I sat back on the couch and stared out the window at the gathering dusk. My suitcase was already packed for the trip, but it wasn't filled with snacks for the boys or emergency changes of clothes this time. It was filled with what I wanted: books, hiking shoes, my sketch pad, things for me. As the last light faded, I let myself whisper one more truth into the empty room. This is only the beginning. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds, casting long slats across my living room floor. I had barely slept, the words I whispered the night before still ringing in my ears. This is only the beginning. It wasn't just a hope anymore, it was a decision, and life apparently had decided to test my resolve immediately. By mid-morning, a new text buzzed in from Pamela. "Brunch at Mom's tomorrow. Would love to see you there. Casual, just family." The saccharine tone practically dripped off the screen. I knew better now. Pamela never did casual. If she was hosting something, it had a purpose, and it usually involved someone else being offered up for public sacrifice. I stared at the text for a moment, feeling the familiar coil of dread tighten in my stomach. Then I straightened my spine and texted back a simple, "See you there." If she wanted to play games, I'd let her set the board. But I wasn't stepping onto it blind anymore. The next day, Doris's house was bustling. The smell of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee floated through the open windows, mingling with the bright chatter of voices. Kids darted between adults, high on sugar and the thrill of unstructured chaos. I walked in, setting my small tote bag by the door, and immediately sensed it. The shift in energy when I entered. Conversations dipped, polite smiles stiffened. Doris came over, arms open, a little too cheerful. "Lucinda, sweetie, so glad you could make it," she gushed, pulling me into a perfunctory hug. I patted her back awkwardly and stepped away. I knew better than to relax. And sure enough, about an hour in, Pamela made her move. We were seated around the backyard patio, plates of food balanced on our laps, the Colorado sun warm on our faces. Out of nowhere, Pamela's voice sliced through the casual chatter. "Hey, Lucinda," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Would you mind watching the boys for a bit after lunch, like always?" The air around us stiffened. Heads turned. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I set it down slowly, wiped my hands on a napkin, and looked directly at her. "I'm not available for that anymore," I said, my voice even but firm. You could have heard a pin drop. Pamela's smile faltered, her eyes darting around to gauge the reactions. Doris gave a tight, disapproving frown. Uncle Carl shifted uncomfortably in his chair. There it was, the trap sprung, and I had refused to step into it. "I just thought, since you're so good with them," Pamela began, but the weakness in her voice betrayed her. She hadn't expected public resistance. I leaned back in my chair, picking up my lemonade with deliberate calm. "I'm here to spend time with the family," I said, "not to work. No apology, no excuses, just the truth, naked and simple." An awkward beat passed. Then someone coughed, another changed the subject, and like a wave breaking awkwardly on a rocky shore, the gathering tried to move on. I caught Ronald's gaze across the patio. His face was unreadable, but his posture, arms crossed, jaw tight, told another story. Later, as the afternoon wore on, Ronald pulled me aside, pretending to help gather empty plates. "Hey," he muttered low enough that no one else would hear. "Can I show you something?" Curious but wary, I followed him inside. He led me to the small study off the main hall where the family kept old tax documents and photo albums. From a drawer, Ronald pulled out a thin, battered folder, flipping it open to reveal receipts, printed emails, even a few old text screenshots. "I found these cleaning out the storage closet," he said. "Pamela's been telling the family for years that she paid you for helping out with the kids. Babysitting money. Said you were doing it as a favor, but that she always made sure you were taken care of." My stomach turned as I scanned the pages. Payment records, but not to me. Transactions listed under maintenance, pet sitting, even spa days. None to me, not once. "She lied," Ronald said quietly, almost to himself. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The betrayal wasn't new, but the confirmation of it hit like a second betrayal all over again. And she made sure everyone thought you were just being dramatic, he added. That you were just ungrateful. I pressed my hand against the edge of the table, grounding myself against the sudden dizziness. Why are you showing me this? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ronald hesitated. Then he said, Because I was one of them. I believed her. I'm not proud of that. The admission hung between us, raw and heavy. You don't owe me anything, I said finally. I do, Ronald said simply. And maybe I can't undo all of it. But I can stop pretending I don't see it now. He closed the folder, his expression grim and resolved. If Pamela thinks she can silence this, she's about to be proven wrong. I stared at him, heart pounding. For the first time in this long, messy war, someone besides me wasn't looking away. And something deep inside me, the place that had curled in on itself for so many years, unfolded just a little. The real war hadn't even started yet. The next morning, the sky over Boulder was a dull, indifferent gray, as if the heavens themselves knew a storm was about to break. I woke early, restless, my stomach knotted in anticipation. Ronald's revelation still echoed in my mind, a heavy drumbeat that wouldn't let up. By noon, a message popped up in the family group chat, Pamela's name flashing at the top. Family meeting at Mom's. Everyone needs to be there. Important. No explanation. No pretense of casual brunch or friendly gathering. Just an order. I stared at the message, feeling a tightness grow in my chest. This wasn't a reconciliation. It was a trap, but I wasn't going to shy away from it. Not anymore. By 3 o'clock, I pulled up outside Doris's house. The driveway was already crowded. Ronald's truck, Pamela's SUV, Josh's beat-up sedan. Even distant cousins I hadn't seen in years were summoned, apparently. Inside, the living room had been cleared of its usual clutter. The furniture was pushed back to create an open circle of chairs, like some twisted therapy session. Pamela stood in the center, hands folded neatly in front of her like a courtroom prosecutor. Doris sat to one side, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, face drawn into lines of rigid disappointment. The others milled about awkwardly until Pamela clapped her hands once, sharply. Let's get started, she said. I sat down slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Pamela started off with a sickly sweet voice. We're here because there's been a lot of hurt lately, she said, glancing pointedly at me. And we need to clear the air for the sake of the family. I bit back a bitter laugh. They didn't want to clear the air. They wanted me to recant, to grovel, to erase my boundary and pretend none of it ever happened. One by one, they took turns. You've changed, Lucinda, Doris said, shaking her head like I was a misbehaving child. Family comes first. Always has, always will. It's not fair to make Mom feel like she failed you, Pamela chimed in, voice quivering with faux emotion. After everything she's done. Josh, who rarely spoke at these things, muttered, Maybe you just need to let go of old grudges. Nobody's perfect. It wasn't just words. It was a slow, relentless erosion, each guilt-laced comment designed to wear me down, make me doubt myself, push me back into the mold they had carved for me. But this time, I stayed still. I didn't interrupt. I didn't flinch. I let them say everything they needed to say. Every last drop of self-righteousness spilled out onto the carpet between us. When the room finally fell into expectant silence, I stood. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just said clearly and calmly, You don't get to demand my loyalty while ignoring my humanity. The words landed like a slap across the face. Pamela's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Doris looked like someone had dumped a bucket of cold water over her. I turned to leave, but before I could reach the door, Ronald stood up. Enough, he said loudly, his voice slicing through the thick air. Everyone turned, startled. You turned loving family into an obligation trap, Ronald continued, glaring directly at Doris. You made being a part of this family conditional, on obedience, on silence. Doris stiffened. Ronald, that's not fair. No, what's not fair is expecting Lucinda to sacrifice her life just so you can feel better about yours, he shot back. What's not fair is lying about what really went on for years and expecting her to keep playing along like some grateful servant. A shocked gasp rippled around the room. "How dare you?" Pamela started, but Ronald cut her off with a sharp gesture. "No, you don't get to cry family only when it benefits you. You don't get to rewrite history because it's inconvenient now." The room erupted into chaos. Voices overlapping, accusations flying like arrows across the circle. "You're tearing this family apart!" Doris cried. "No," Ronald said firmly. "You did that a long time ago. We're just finally admitting it." I slipped outside while they fought, the cool evening air slapping against my flushed cheeks. I stood on the porch, breathing deep, feeling the world tilt under my feet but refusing to fall. Inside, the screaming continued. Doors slammed, old resentments hurled like grenades. Years of buried bitterness ripping free all at once. I knew deep down that nothing would ever be the same after today. I leaned against the railing, staring up at the bruised sky above, whispering to no one. There's no going back now. The morning after the chaos, the air felt heavier, as if even Boulder itself was holding its breath. I woke before the sun had fully risen, my body stiff from a restless night spent replaying the confrontation in my mind. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of black coffee, when my phone buzzed against the wood. Ronald's name lit up the screen. A simple message. "Be at Mom's at 9. Trust me." No explanation, no promises, just trust. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying my heartbeat. Then I grabbed my keys and headed out. When I arrived, the atmosphere inside Doris's house was thick and brittle, like glass about to shatter. Doris stood rigid by the fireplace. Pamela sat on the sofa, legs crossed tightly, a fake calm pasted across her face. Ronald leaned against the far wall, arms folded, a man who had made up his mind and wasn't budging. Without waiting for permission, he strode to the center of the room and held up a manila folder, the same one he had shown me. He didn't waste time. "You have two options, Pamela," Ronald said, his voice sharp as a blade. "You fix this publicly, or I will." Pamela's mouth twisted into a sneer. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Ronald flipped the folder open, pulling out printed receipts, copies of texts, even screenshots from years past, meticulously collected proof of Pamela's manipulation. "You lied to everyone," Ronald said, raising his voice so no one could pretend they hadn't heard. "You told the family you were covering costs for Lucinda when you never paid her a dime. You guilted her into free labor, then painted her as selfish when she pushed back." Doris's face paled, her hand trembling slightly where she clutched her sweater. Pamela opened her mouth to object, but Ronald wasn't finished. "And if you think I'll sit back and let you spin more lies, you're dead wrong." Silence reigned, sharp and cold. After an agonizing pause, Pamela's shoulders sagged. She glanced around, seeing, perhaps for the first time, that even her longtime defenders were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "Fine," she spat, her voice low. "I'll say what you want." Ronald's jaw tightened. "Not what I want. What's right?" He motioned toward the rest of the family, now awkwardly gathered, clearly dragged here on short notice but too curious or complicit to leave. Standing stiffly, Pamela cleared her throat. "I owe an apology," she said through clenched teeth, "to Lucinda for misrepresenting things and for putting unfair expectations on her. It wasn't heartfelt, it wasn't pure, but it was public, and in its own way, it was a dismantling of years of lies." I stood quietly, letting the words hang in the air without acknowledgement. I didn't need her apology to heal. I needed them to know I wasn't their scapegoat anymore. Pamela looked ready to bolt, but Ronald wasn't done. He stepped forward again, this time laying out the receipts on the coffee table for everyone to see. Dates, expenses, gaps between what was claimed and what was real. Josh whistled under his breath. Aunt Marcy's eyebrows shot up. Even Doris, ever the master of self-denial, looked rattled. "I thought you said Lucinda was reimbursed," Doris said, voice shaking slightly. Pamela's lips tightened. I might have exaggerated." "You lied," Ronald corrected. "Simple, brutal, true." The room seemed to sag under the weight of the exposed truth. Years of whispered doubts, small betrayals, and buried resentments surged to the surface, undeniable now. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. I just stood there, breathing it in, the heavy, messy liberation of it all. When Ronald finally closed the folder and tucked it under his arm, the meeting ended not with a bang, but a cold, stunned silence. People filed out quietly, no one quite meeting my eye. Not with anger, with shame, and that was enough. I walked slowly down the driveway, the morning sun warm on my face. My suitcase still sat in the trunk of my car, books and hiking shoes packed, ready to leave behind all the expectations that had weighed me down for so long. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. I hadn't burned the bridge. I had just stopped holding it up. 2 weeks later, life hadn't magically transformed into a fairy tale, but it had settled into a quieter, more honest rhythm. The family had decided to hold another gathering, one of those let's move forward sessions that felt more like applying a band-aid to a wound that needed stitches. Still, I agreed to go, not because I believed a miracle would happen, but because showing up on my own terms mattered. When I pulled into Doris's driveway, I noticed right away how different everything felt. There was no buzz of chaotic energy, no desperate attempts to smooth over cracks, just a wary, waiting stillness. Inside, chairs had been arranged in a loose circle. It felt more like a support group than a reunion. Pamela stood up as soon as I entered. She looked smaller than I remembered, like someone who had finally been forced to carry her own weight for the first time. Her voice didn't tremble, and it wasn't dripping with fake sweetness either. For once, it was just plain, simple, tired. "I owe you an apology," she said, her eyes meeting mine without darting away. "A real one this time." The room held its breath. "I took advantage of you," she continued. "I lied. I made excuses. I let everyone believe things that weren't true because it was easier for me. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." No buts, no justifications, just the truth. I didn't clap. I didn't rush forward for a hug. I simply nodded. Some wounds didn't close with a single admission, but acknowledgement mattered, and for once, no one jumped in to soften the blow or urge me to let it go. Progress, however fragile, was still progress. Afterward, Ronald pulled me aside while the others awkwardly made small talk about summer plans and new job opportunities. "I set something up," he said, handing me a simple flyer. It was for a professional childcare service he'd already hired for future family events. "No more volunteering," he said, half smiling. "Family means support, not sacrifice." I felt a lump rise in my throat but forced it down, managing a grateful smile. "Thank you," I said. "Really?" Ronald shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. But it was. It was massive. Later, as I grabbed a cup of coffee from the kitchen, Nadine slipped beside me. "I should have spoken up earlier," she said quietly. I glanced at her, eyebrows raised. "You weren't wrong," she said, looking genuinely ashamed. "I was just scared to stand with you. But I'm not anymore." Her words were low but steady. Not loud enough to turn heads, but loud enough to matter. I squeezed her hand once, briefly. No more grand declarations were needed. It was enough. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of burnt orange and soft pink, I found myself wandering along Pearl Street Mall with Lauren. Shops buzzed gently, kids laughed in the distance, a street performer played soft guitar near the corner. We walked in comfortable silence, the kind born not from absence, but from mutual understanding. Lauren glanced at me after a while and asked, "So, what now?" I smiled, really smiled, for the first time in what felt like forever. "Now," I said, "now I build something that's mine, not against them. Not to prove anything, just for me. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt, and that was okay. I didn't lose a family. I just found the courage to finally define my place within it." Looking back now, I realize that setting boundaries isn't about pushing people away. It's about choosing yourself when no one else will. It's about knowing that you are worthy of respect, even if you have to stand alone for a while to claim it. Healing isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet decision to stop carrying burdens that were never yours to begin with. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever been the one expected to stay silent, to sacrifice without thanks, then know this: you are not wrong for wanting better. You are not selfish for saying no. You are not less worthy because you chose your peace over someone else's comfort. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment where choosing yourself meant losing what you thought you needed? How did it change you? Share your story in the comments. Let's build a space where strength and honesty are celebrated. If this video touched your heart, please comment 1 inch below or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't quite resonate, tell me why. Your feedback matters too. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you believe stories like these deserve to be heard. Together, we're rewriting what it means to be family, one story at a time.